entire what's called New Testament could have been written in all Greek and some Aramaic and nothing, not a thing, in zero in Hebrew. Therefore, I'm telling you, it smacks of religious fraud. I believe it's religious fraud. I believe it's the worst religious fraud ever in history of United States, history of all of Earth. And it could be possible. And then some are going to say, well, Ted, you're Antichrist. How can it be something is written that says if you're against this thing, what we call Christ, what is possibly a false child of Messiah, if you're anti this or against it, how can this be? This is Antichrist or 666 or some number, that was written in the New Testament. If I wrote something now, in fact, I've written things that said if you're anti-Ted, you're evil. Therefore, these wrote if you're against Jesus, you're evil. And I don't believe if Jesus was a false child of Messiah, it's even remotely evil. It's breakthrough. It's setting records straight. It's definitely good to break through. And see, the problem is they're using quote unquote New Testament to compare against, well, if Jesus did all these things, Ted has to be able to do all of these things, or Ted cannot be Jesus, or Ted cannot be a coming of child of Messiah. And this is what many have already done. And if Jesus and the entire New Testament is false, and all these quote miracles what Ted cannot do, and all these quote healings and resurrections from completely dead, what Ted cannot do, then they're saying, well, Ted cannot be true a second coming because Ted is not in the parameters ever in line with what Jesus could do. And if what was quote unquote written, what Jesus could do, what Jesus did, is not accurate and not true, and Jesus was false, and the entire New Testament was false, then you're rejecting Ted based on what you have in New Testament, and even some of what you had in the Old Testament or the Jewish, or in Judaism scriptures, scrolls and in Judaism scriptures, you're trying to reject Ted even based on this. You see, even what Moses wrote is not completely accurate. It's not, because there's no truth to God created Adam and Eve from dust. God used technology. God used enormously advanced technology and genetics and different things to create, and not from dust. He was just trying to tell you metaphorically, God over an enormous amount of time did mining and built these things and mined gold and metals and mined all this stuff and built and invented and was a huge inventor and was a huge physicist and was a huge scientist and was huge in computers and operating systems and software and developed all this technology, including computers, operating systems and software and technology to create. Yes, some of you are going to insist, God created the entire universe and just out of his brain. God did not create all this out of his brain. Somehow the universe existed, then God existed. And God also created upgrades to self. God's spiritual ability, a spiritual living thing, were upgrades to God's to self. God learned spiritual and then created upgrades and killed off the original old thing. He started killing off things, and God created upgrades after some parallel. Don't blame Ted for Ted's current what seems to be serious mental illness and different things. Don't blame Ted. Don't blame Ted for Ted's mental problems. Don't blame Ted for Ted's mental illnesses. Don't blame Ted for Ted's mental problems. Don't blame Ted for Ted's stuttering. Don't blame Ted for Ted's speech impediments. After the 40 days and 40 nights and for about a year, Ted could not even hardly write his name. Ted could not even speak. Ted was really enormously stuttering, stammering, could not even talk. Correct. Ted was in terrible shape. And Michael, what then was holy, covering archangel, is primarily to blame. And what Michael's not holy currently, and no angels are holy now. Ted is the only thing divine and are holy and are sacred, living to non-living, an entire universe, and in heaven are now called original heaven and on earth. And you need to realize Ted had 40 days and 40 nights and at least a year of spiritual events that are unprecedented for any humans. They've never had spiritual events like this. No human on earth has ever had this much spiritual and these many hostile, hateful, spiritual living things, to mean things, to meanest things you can imagine, to terrible things after any human this much. And Ted, survived it. Ted was alive, and Ted started to do writing, and then he started to do some photos, and then started to do videos. Yet Ted is not to blame for Ted's current mental condition. We're going to blame Michael lifting the covers too much and allowing too much, and we're going to blame Ted getting hit with illegal drugs and different drugs and chemicals and poisons and different things, including Rosie did some things. That's why Ted quickly became enormously fat and was starting to have heart problems, nearly had a heart attack. She was putting animal steroids and different drugs and chemicals and things in Ted's foods and drinks. Rosie attempted to Black Widow Ted and was also putting drugs against Ted's will, chemicals, different drugs, illegal drugs, different things. And Ted definitely has been hit with LSD too many times by this time. And I guess I better in this video and tell you, don't blame Ted. If you're upset, angry, or furious with Ted, to live to enrage, you're blaming Ted. Humans of Earth, you've been treating Ted much too unfairly. You've been laughing at Ted, mocking Ted, jeering Ted, making fun of Ted, thinking it's really funny to terribly funny. Ted's mental condition, and where it's obvious in some of these videos with how he speaks and how he sometimes stutters and stammers, and he has slurs, and he seems to be real slow, and he doesn't seem to be how quick he used to be. He seems to definitely be much slower. Sometimes he does have experience. There's an enormous amount of experience for a human, religiously, and even in software and computers and other things, and in business. Therefore, don't blame Ted and somebody making fun of Ted, mocking him, jeering him, making jokes about Ted, thinking this is really funny. They're terribly funny. You're going to pay for this. Many of you are going to pay if you don't worship Ted and do enough for Ted and obey Ted enough, whether you understand it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether you have understanding and or knowledge of this or not. Ted is not saving you. Ted is the Savior. Ted is the only thing that saves. Ted is the judge. Ted is the supreme judge. Ted is God. Ted is the one living God. Ted is the creator. Ted is the only creator. Ted is the Lord of all things. Ted is the King of all things, including of universe and heaven and earth. Ted is the Lord of universe and heaven and earth. There's one God. There's one the Creator. There's one Lord. There's one the King of all things. Not three in one. Not even two in one. There's no God the Father and God the Son. There's no Father and Son. Never existed. Humans of Earth, you're so deceived you cannot believe it. Stop blaming Ted. Much of this is not his fault. His current mental state or mental condition or serious mental problems he's been having and serious mental illness he's been having. Much of this is not Ted's fault. Ted's practically crazy now. He's doing the best he can. Well, not the best he can, but he's doing what he does.